The moment I saw my mother's face, I knew something was wrong. Even as Cameron squeezed my hand and the champagne bubbles tickled my nose, her tight-lipped smile told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be the engagement celebration I'd dreamed of. I'm Nicole, and I'd spent 29 years trying to make my mother proud. Tonight was supposed to be different, special. "We're getting married," I announced, holding up my left hand to show off the vintage emerald ring Cameron had surprised me with last weekend. My sister Lexi squealed and rushed to hug me, while my mother remained seated, swirling her wine glass with practiced precision. "That's wonderful, dear," she said, her voice flat. "When were you thinking of having the ceremony?" "We're looking at next spring," Cameron replied, his arm protectively around my waist. "We wanted to keep it traditional." "Traditional?" My mother's eyebrow arched. "Speaking of traditional, Lexi, didn't you and Hugo set a date for September?" Lexi nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. And Mom, I was thinking about Grandma Aurora's dress." "Of course," my mother interrupted. "I've already had it cleaned and preserved. It'll look perfect on you." The room went silent. My heart stopped. "But I always thought—" I started, my voice barely a whisper. That dress had been my dream since I was a little girl. I'd spent countless hours in Grandma Aurora's attic, running my fingers over the delicate lace, imagining my own wedding day. "Nicole, dear, be reasonable," my mother said, setting down her wine glass. "Lexi's wedding is sooner, and the dress suits her frame better. You're a bit too athletic for it." Cameron's grip on my waist tightened. "Mrs. Sutton, I don't think—" "It's fine," I cut him off, even though it wasn't. Nothing about this was fine. "Lexi should have it. My sister at least had the decency to look uncomfortable." "Nick, if you want it—" "No, Mom's right. You'll look beautiful in it." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Later that night, as Cameron drove us home, he kept glancing at me with concern. "You don't have to pretend that didn't hurt." "Did you see her face?" I asked, staring out the window. "She didn't even hesitate. It's like she'd decided long before tonight." "Maybe there's more to it," he suggested gently. I turned to look at him, something clicking into place. "You know what? I think you're right, and I'm going to find out exactly what that is." "You're not going to believe what I found," I told Paige, spreading old photographs across her kitchen counter. "Look at this one." The yellowed photo showed my grandmother wearing the dress radiant on her wedding day. But what caught my attention was the way my mother, barely visible in the background, was looking at the dress with an expression I'd never seen before. "She looks angry." Paige squinted at the photo, coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips. "Exactly, and look at this." I pulled out another photo, this one from when I was 12. "Remember this day? When Grandma Aurora let me try on her veil?" "Your mum looks like she's sucking on a lemon in that one too," Paige observed. "But Nicole, honey, are you sure you're not just seeing what you want to see?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Dominic, my parents' oldest friend. "Heard about the dress situation. Need to talk. Meet me at Carlo's." 20 minutes later, I slid into a booth across from Dominic at our local Italian restaurant. His face was unusually serious. "Your mother called me last night," he said, stirring his espresso. "She was upset that you might start asking questions." "About what?" He glanced around before leaning forward. "There are things about that dress, about your grandmother, that Thea would prefer stayed buried." "What things?" "It's not my place to—" "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't protect her, Dominic. I've had enough of people protecting my mother while she hurts me." He sat back, studying me. "You remind me so much of Aurora right now. She had that same look when she stood up to—" He stopped abruptly. "When she stood up to who?" "Look," he sighed. "All I can say is that dress represents more than just a family heirloom. Ask your mother about the summer of '89, about Richard." "Who's Richard?" But Dominic was already standing, dropping money on the table. "I've said too much. Just be careful how you handle this, Nicole. Some secrets leave scars that never heal." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the name Richard, about my mother's strange behavior, about Dominic's warning. At 3 a.m., I finally got up and drove to my parents' house. I still had a key. The attic was exactly as I remembered it. Using my phone's flashlight, I made my way to the old trunk where Grandma Aurora kept her memories. As I lifted the lid, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a letter dated 1989 in my grandmother's handwriting. The first line made my blood run cold. Dearest Thea, I know what you did, and I can never forgive you. My hands shook as I read the rest of the letter. The more I read, the harder it became to breathe. I trusted you with everything, Aurora had written. And you betrayed not just me, but Richard as well. The dress was never meant for you, and you know why. The attic door creaked behind me. I spun around to find Lexi standing there in her pajamas looking confused. Nick? What are you doing here at this hour? I shoved the letter into my pocket. I could ask you the same thing. I live here, remember? Moved back in while Hugo's apartment is being renovated. She stepped closer, frowning. Are you going through Grandma's things? Did you know about Richard? I asked abruptly. Lexi's face went blank. Who? Don't lie to me. Not you too. I honestly don't know what you're talking about. She sat down beside me on the dusty floor. But I do know something's not right with Mom lately. Ever since you got engaged, she's been having these intense phone calls in private. I heard her crying in her study yesterday. I pulled out the letter and handed it to her. As she read, her eyes widened. Holy shit, she whispered. Mom did something to Grandma Aurora. And who's Richard? That's what I need to find out. I started rifling through more papers in the trunk. Help me look. For the next hour, Lexi and I dug through decades of memories. Birth announcements, Christmas cards, old receipts. Then Lexi gasped. Look at this. She held up a small black and white photo. A man in a military uniform stood next to our grandmother, both of them laughing. On the back was written, Richard and me, 1988. He looks exactly like you, Nick, Lexi said quietly. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made us both freeze. Our mother appeared in the doorway, her face ashen when she saw what we were holding. Put that away, she commanded, her voice trembling. You have no right. No right, I stood up, letter clutched in my hand. Like you had no right to keep this from me, to give Lexi the dress when Grandma Aurora clearly never wanted you to have that power. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Who is Richard? What did you do to Grandma? Mom's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto an old chair. Richard was your real grandfather, she whispered, and I'm the reason he never knew about you. The photo slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor in the heavy silence that followed. What do you mean he's my real grandfather? I demanded. What about Grandpa James? Mom wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. James was the man Aurora married after I ruined everything. Tell us, Lexi insisted, gripping my hand. Richard and Aurora were engaged. The dress. It was her mother's, and she'd already promised it to me for my own wedding. But then I discovered their plan to move to Europe after the wedding. I couldn't bear the thought of losing my mother. So what did you do? My voice was barely a whisper. I told Richard that Aurora was having an affair. I fabricated evidence, letters, photos. He was devastated, called off the wedding, deployed overseas, and never came back. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. He died thinking Aurora had betrayed him, Lexi gasped. Mom, how could you? But that's not all, is it? I pressed, remembering Dominic's expression. There's more. Mom nodded, her hands shaking. Aurora was pregnant when Richard left. With you, Nicole. She married James quickly to avoid scandal, but she choked on a sob. Richard never knew he had a granddaughter. The room spun. I grabbed the nearest box for support. That's why you won't let me have the dress, I said. Because every time you look at me, you see them. You see your guilt. Nicole, please. And Lexi. She's James's biological granddaughter, isn't she? That's why you favour her. Because she's safe. She doesn't remind you of what you did. The attic door creaked again. This time it was Dominic. I heard voices, he said, then took in the scene. Ah, they know. You knew. I turned on him. All this time. I was the one who helped Aurora track down Richard years later, he admitted. But by then, he had passed away. Cancer. Did he... My voice cracked. Did he ever know the truth about Aurora? I showed him proof of your mother's deception on his deathbed, Dominic said quietly. His last words were about Aurora, about how he never stopped loving her. Mom crumpled to the floor, sobbing. Lexi moved to comfort her, but I couldn't. Wouldn't. The dress belongs to Nicole, Dominic said firmly. Aurora left specific instructions. It's her birthright, as Richard's granddaughter. I turned to leave, but Mom grabbed my ankle. Please, she begged. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but... You're right, I said, pulling away. You don't. I walked out of the attic, out of the house, leaving behind the sound of my mother's tears and 30 years of lies. Cameron found me sitting on our apartment balcony at sunrise, still clutching the photo of Richard. You look just like him, he said softly, placing a coffee beside me. Lexi called, told me everything. My whole life has been a lie. I traced Richard's face with my finger. And the worst part, Mom's still trying to control the narrative. She's already texting about family therapy and moving forward together. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Dominic. Found Aurora's will. The dress stipulations are clear. Come to my office. An hour later, Cameron and I sat across from Dominic as he pulled out a thick envelope. Aurora knew this day would come, he said, extracting several documents. She left this for you, Nicole, along with very specific instructions about the dress. I opened the sealed letter with trembling hands and read aloud, My dearest Nicole, if you're reading this, you finally know the truth about Richard. Your real grandfather. The dress was his last gift to me, bought with his military savings. I've watched you grow into his spitting image. Same smile, same spirit. The dress was always meant for you, not because of bloodlines, but because you embody everything Richard and I dreamed of. Truth, courage, and unwavering love. There's more, Dominic said, sliding over legal papers. The dress legally belongs to you. Aurora made sure of that. Cameron squeezed my hand. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone lit up with Lexi's face. Nick. Her voice was frantic. Mum's at the bridal shop with the dress right now. She's having it altered for me. She's trying to make it happen before anyone can stop her. Like hell she is. I stood up, gathering the papers. Which shop? Bella's on 5th. But Nick, she's not thinking straight. She kept muttering about fixing things and keeping the family together. Call Hugo, I said. He needs to know what kind of family he's marrying into. Cameron grabbed his keys. I'm driving. As we raced downtown, Dominic's words echoed in my head. Aurora always said the truth has a way of coming out at the perfect moment. The perfect moment was now. My mother had spent 30 years orchestrating everyone's lives through manipulation and lies. She'd torn apart my grandparents' love story, denied me my heritage, and was still trying to control the narrative. We're here, Cameron announced, pulling up to Bella's. Through the window, I could see my mother hovering over a seamstress working on the dress. Ready? He asked. I clutched Aurora's letter and straightened my spine. Time to end this charade. The bell above the door chimed as we entered Bella's. Mom's head snapped up, her face draining of colour. Step away from the dress, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Nicole, please, she started, moving to block the seamstress. You don't understand. This is for the best. The best, I laughed bitterly, holding up Aurora's letter. Like it was for the best when you destroyed your own mother's happiness? When you kept me from knowing my real grandfather? The seamstress slowly put down her scissors, eyes darting between us. Perhaps I should step out, she began. No, stay, I said. You should hear this too. That dress you're working on? It's stolen property. It most certainly is not, Mom protested. I am Aurora's daughter. And I'm Richard's granddaughter, I cut in, slapping the legal papers on the counter. The dress's rightful owner, according to Aurora's will, which you knew about, didn't you? The shop door chimed again. Lexi rushed in with Hugo close behind. "Mom, stop this!" Lexi pleaded. "I don't want the dress. Not like this." Hugo stepped forward, frowning. "Can someone explain what's going on?" "Oh, you want explanations?" I turned to him. "Let me tell you about the woman you're about to call mother-in-law. About how she destroyed her own mother's happiness, separated two people in love, and kept a man from knowing his granddaughter." "Nicole, enough!" Mom's voice cracked like a whip. "No, not enough. For 30 years, you've controlled everything. You've lied, manipulated, and hurt people. And for what? Because you were afraid of being left behind. I did it for this family." "You did it for yourself," Lexi said quietly. "And I can't be part of it anymore. Hugo, I'm sorry, but the wedding's off." Hugo's jaw dropped. "What?" "At least until we sort this mess out," Lexi added, removing her engagement ring. "I can't walk down the aisle in a dress built on lies." Mum sank into a nearby chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling. "Ms. Romano," I addressed the seamstress, "please stop work on the dress. Here are the legal documents proving ownership. I'll be taking it with me today." The seamstress nodded, carefully removing the dress from the mannequin. "The rehearsal dinner's tomorrow," Mom said weakly. "What am I supposed to tell people?" "The truth," Cameron spoke up for the first time. "For once in your life, tell the truth." As I took the dress, now in its protective bag, I turned to my mother one last time. "You wanted to keep the family together? Congratulations. You just tore it apart." The rehearsal dinner venue buzzed with confused whispers. Despite Lexi's postponement, most guests had shown up expecting explanations. I stood at the entrance, the dress bag draped over my arm, watching my mother attempt to maintain her composure at the main table. "Are you sure about this?" Cameron whispered. "They all need to know." I squeezed his hand and walked to the center of the room. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" The room fell silent. "I know you're all wondering what's going on, why Lexi postponed the wedding, why I'm holding this dress." Mom half rose from her chair. "Nicole, please." "No more secrets," I said firmly. "This dress belonged to my grandmother Aurora. She meant to wear it when she married Richard, my biological grandfather. But she never got the chance because someone destroyed their relationship with lies." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw Dominic nod encouragingly from his seat. "Mum, would you like to tell them? Or should I?" She remained silent, gripping her water glass. 30 years ago, my mother fabricated evidence of an affair to break up Aurora and Richard. She kept a man from knowing his granddaughter. She manipulated everyone around her, including me and Lexi, to keep her secrets buried. "It wasn't like that," Mom suddenly burst out, standing. "I was young, scared. Aurora was going to leave the country. I couldn't lose my mother." "So you made her lose the love of her life instead?" Lexi stood too. "Made her marry Grandpa James to avoid scandal?" Hugo's mother gasped. "James wasn't—" "No," I confirmed. "He wasn't my biological grandfather, but he was a good man who stepped up when Richard was driven away. Richard, who died never knowing about me, thanks to Mom's lies." "I tried to make it right," Mom pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to protect everyone." "By continuing to lie," I unzipped the dress bag, "by trying to give away a dress that was never yours to give, that legally belongs to me as Richard's granddaughter." The vintage lace caught the light, drawing awed murmurs from the guests. "Aurora left this dress to me," I continued, my voice softening. "Not because of blood, but because I reminded her of everything she and Richard stood for: truth, love, and courage." I turned to Lexi and Hugo. "Your wedding shouldn't be built on lies. You deserve better. We all do." Mum collapsed back into her chair, decades of deception finally exposed to the light. "The truth hurts," I said, looking around the room. "But lies destroy. And I'm done letting them destroy this family." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs. The morning sun filtered through Aurora's dress, now hanging in my apartment window. Each beam of light caught the intricate lace patterns, casting delicate shadows on the floor where I sat with a stack of letters. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lexi and Mom standing there. "Can we come in?" Lexi asked. Mum looked smaller somehow, clutching a worn leather photo album. I stepped aside to let them enter. Mum's eyes immediately found the dress. "It looks different here," she whispered. "More like when Aurora wore it." "I found more letters," I said, gesturing to the pile. "Between Richard and Aurora. They were hidden in the dress's lining." Mum's hands trembled as she reached for one. "May I?" I nodded. As she read, fresh tears fell. "He wrote about their future children," she said, "about the family they'd build." She looked up at me. "About the life I stole from them. From you." "Mom brought something to show you," Lexi prompted gently. Mom opened the photo album. "These are from before I ruined everything. When Aurora and Richard were happy." She pointed to a photo of them dancing. "You have his laugh, Nicole, his way of throwing your head back when something really amuses you." "Why show me this now?" "Because I'm done hiding," she said. "Done pretending. I've started therapy. Real therapy, not just family counseling. I need to understand why I hurt the people I love most." The door opened, and Cameron walked in with coffee cups. "Oh, sorry, I didn't—" "Stay," I said. "Please." Mom turned to him. "Cameron, I owe you an apology too. The way I treated your engagement, how I tried to diminish your happiness." "The dress looks perfect here," he interrupted kindly, "like it's finally home." Lexi squeezed my hand. "Hugo and I set a new date, a spring wedding like you wanted, but not in this dress. This belongs to you, Nick. It always did." "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," I told Mom, "but I'm willing to try building something new, something honest." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "That's more than I deserve. It's what Richard and Aurora would have wanted," I said, picking up one of their letters. "Listen to this. Love isn't about possession or control. It's about letting people be who they truly are." Mom stood and walked to the dress, gently touching the lace. "You'll be beautiful in this, just like Aurora, just like Richard always dreamed his family would be." The morning light shifted, and for a moment the dress seemed to glow. Somewhere, I felt Aurora and Richard smiling. Their love story hadn't ended in tragedy after all. It had just taken a different path to find its way home.